Okay, this video is a reaction to, more than a response, to a video by MrDagon007, in which he commented that he considered a flipper on a knife to be rather vulgar. This led to some comments, and it also led to him pretty much saying that any kind of flicking, whether it be a flipper or with thumb studs, is a bit vulgar. And as I've sort of perused the knife community, I have sort of discovered, even as a newbie, that there does seem to be sort of a divide between sort of the tactical side and, say, the ST Schmalhaus and the MrDagon007s, who are more interested in the gentlemanliness of it. And I feel a little bit of sympathy with that side of it, because I live in Japan. And the truth is, in Japan, no one would ever think to ask me, "May I borrow your knife?" Instead, they would ask me, "Can I borrow your cutter?" A cutter being like a box cutter, a break-off, segmented utility knife. Now that said, if they asked me, "Can I borrow your cutter?" and I pulled this out, I can see them freaking out a little bit. It's bigger than it needs to be. It attracts attention to itself. I'm just responding to what they asked, but I'm doing it in a way that kind of exceeds their expectations. I would also say that if they asked me if they could borrow a cutter and I pulled this out, the reaction would be much stronger. And after that, I'd go to jail. And it wouldn't matter if I told them, "But see, this point is based on a Japanese sword. It's very traditional." I'd still go to jail, pretty much. Similarly, I think, if I transport myself to the US, and someone who's not a knife person asks me if they can borrow a knife, what they're thinking of is something like this little teakut canoe. It's a traditional folder. It looks like something their grandfather used to have. And if I hand it to them, they know how to open it. Or if I open it for them, it doesn't really freak them out. They recognize it. They understand it. By contrast, if I take out something like this Spyderco Squeak, just the configuration of it, although it's beautiful to me, looks a bit more tactical to them. And even though the blade isn't significantly longer than that on the teakut, and in fact it's exactly the same as the spay blade, there's just something about it that attracts attention to itself. And I would argue that's what makes it a bit gaudy. If I did pull out the big SOG, even if I did it, as smoothly as possible, their first reaction is going to be expecting trouble. Now, what I guess I'm getting at is, even if I give them a small knife, let's say this Sanren Mu, something about it just is not what they're expecting. It's something a little extra. And that's what I think makes even the knife vulgar. So it may not be the flicking or the flippers. It might just be the knife itself. So even if I do this, and I hand it to them, they don't know how to close it, they're like, and they break it, and you have to take it from them. I guess it's roughly the equivalent of answering the question, "May I borrow your knife?" with, "Of course you can borrow my knife," and then handing them the knife. Now, if I throw in a flick, now I've answered the question, "May I borrow your knife?" with, "Of course you can borrow my knife," and then I've done a pirouette and I've handed them my knife. Again, that's vulgar. It attracts attention to itself. If I then add a middle finger flick, okay, now I've answered the question, "May I borrow your knife?" with, "Of course you can borrow my knife." I've done a pirouette, I've done 2 handsprings, and then I've handed them my knife. Again, it's the rising above the expectations, but in a fairly attention-getting way. that becomes vulgar. You know, if I hand them a beautiful inlaid mkusta, then I don't think they're going to react the same way as if I hand them something that's a locking blade. They don't understand it. They can't use it without a little help. And I would even argue, even if I didn't flick it, just that snap, if I open it, 2/3 of the way, and then flick it, I'm still being vulgar. I'm still attracting attention to myself in a way that I don't think non-knife people appreciate. So if I then transport myself to where I'm sitting next to a table full of people, and all they're doing is flicking their knives, there's a whole table of people going, "This is fast. This is fast. You see how fast this is? I can cut you. I can cut you." That's not necessarily an image that knife people want to present. And I think that's why, people who have balisongs, I feel especially sorry for. Because you've got this beautiful, intricate knife that arguably in and of itself is very vulgar in the sense that it attracts attention to itself. "May I borrow your knife?" and you flip this thing around. That's why I think a lot of people who, in addition to their self-defense knife, carry something smaller, or even something like the ticket. So I would encourage people to think about sort of the perception you send off. What is the image you're projecting when you're around non-knife people? And I don't want you to carry like 37 knives and try to figure out who your audience is. Just be aware, a little situational awareness. But that's just my opinion. It might be mere blather.